Hi there, Tracy here, artist in residence for Imagine. In today's video, we're going to make this cute little card. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so we're going to start out with a piece of smooth paper. And I'm going to be using several brushes and several inks. So I'm going to be using the Memento and the VersaMagic to do some ink blending here. We're going to make a little spacey background. So I'm starting out with my elderberry, and I've got a soft brush for this. And I'm just going to brush it in just kind of in random spots and not a bunch. So the idea here is I'm going from dark to light when it comes to the center. So I'll go, maybe 3 spots here with this darkest elderberry and just kind of blend that out. And then I'm going to grab the Lulu Lavender, and I'm not even cleaning my brush. I'm just dipping it right into the Lulu Lavender here. Just kind of a little brush cleaning off to the side on the paper itself. And I'm going to come in and blend it out a bit with the elderberry. Just in those 3 spots again. So as you can see, we're building our ink into a center scene. And this is just a creative use of some of the different kinds of inks from Imagine and Tsukaneko. So next I've got my Perfect Plumeria, and you'll see that's a VersaMagic. So I'm using a different kind of brush, and I'm actually using a Pouncy tool. I like to use the Pouncy tools, and these are a very velvety type of an ink. So even slightly chalky, you could say. So they do, and they are less translucent. So next I'm coming in with Nautical Blue. So notice that you can combine these, and they're beautiful. And I'm just coming around and just working again kind of in those 3 spots that I began, and pulling in this dark, dark blue to just kind of continue our space scene. So see here, we pretty much just have the center to work with. So I'm going to grab here some Teal Zeal. And this one, again, is an ink that's a Memento ink, so I'm using a brush with it. So I'm using my Pouncers on the little VersaMagics, and then using my brushes on the inks. So because they're dye-based inks, and just kind of brushing that out, and it doesn't have to be perfect, it's a space scene. Now I'm going to grab the Purple Hydrangea in the VersaMagic, and notice how it goes right over all those inks and adds that light color. This is exactly what we're looking for. Just so it's kind of almost a cloudy appearance. Then I'm going to grab the Turquoise Gem and go to town here, filling in more areas with sort of, I don't know, clouds, I guess. Sort of a little bit more of a milky feel. We'll just pounce that out, and I'll get the color wherever I think I want it, kind of going random. So I've got my colors on here the way I want. Now I want to add some stars. So I'm just taking one of my little acrylic ink pens and shaking it up really well, and I'm just tapping on it, and that's going to splatter out all these little white specks, which are going to represent my stars. And sometimes this will get a little dry on you when you maybe want some bigger splatters. So the trick is to get a scrap piece of paper and get that ink or that paint rolling again. And there we go. I've got it running again, so I can get plenty of little stars here on my little galactic background. That's good to go. Now you want to wait for this to dry completely. So I'd say 15-20 minutes. Now I've got a stencil here from my stash, and I'm laying it down here on my sticky mat. And I am going to be actually using the Brilliance in Platinum Planet. And the reason that I'm doing that is because the embossing powder that I'm using later is a clear embossing powder, and I don't want it to be clear. I want some color to it. So I'm going to use a pouncer tool again with this because this is more of a pigment. And I'm just going to pounce it out through this stencil. And I find pouncers work really well for stenciling. And I'm not going too heavy because I'm going to be doing 2 coats. And the reason for the 2 coats is to just get a thicker application without making a mess. So I'm just going to pounce this on. I'm going to allow it to dry for 10 or 15 minutes, and then I'm going to come back and do a second layer. So I have more of an opacity to my color, but it's still kind of got that beautiful glow. So as if it were clouds and stars. So my first layer is dried. I'm adding my second layer. And you can see where it becomes more opaque with the second layer. You could go many, many layers and have it completely opaque, but I have a next step, so we're going to just do 2 layers today. I really love working with these inks. The ink pads themselves are a soft, like a foam, I guess, on the VersaMagics and on the Brilliance inks. So it's very easy to pounce into them and grab that ink off. Okay, so I've got my second layer on. I'm going to go ahead and pull my stencil off. Now that's pretty just like it is. You could leave it, but we're going to kick it up a notch. And because the Brilliance ink is kind of thick, it's still wet. So I can use it, I can emboss directly onto it. So I'm pouring, this is a clear embossing powder with a lot of different color sparkles in it. So I'm pouring that on, and I'm not too concerned if it's too heavy on there, like if there are some that aren't on my clouds, because it is clear, and so it's just going to add sparkle. And then I'll go ahead and just heat emboss this and get all of these melted down. And so because I added that Brilliance ink, I've got color back behind it, where if I hadn't, it would just, like if I had just used the VersaMark, it would just be clear and you really wouldn't be able to see all that pretty stenciling. So, you know, think about that with your colored inks, your pigments, and your VersaMagics, your VersaFine Clairs, all of those inks that are slow to dry are fabulous for embossing on. And let's see, it looks like I missed a spot right there. Let's make sure I've got the whole thing embossed before I move on to the next step. So I'm going to trim this down off camera to 5 by 3 3/4, and then I'm going to create a matte layer behind it of black by a little over 5 by a little over 3 3/4. But first I'll go ahead and get my stamping done. So I'm just going to grab some stamps from my stash, and I want to grab one of these little moons. And to stamp that out, I'm going to be using some VersaFine Clair, and I will also be heat embossing with some clear embossing powder over top of it for 2 reasons. 1, to give it a little shine. 2, because I want to do a little ink blending over top of it. And 3, because otherwise I'll smear it, because that's kind of just, the ink stays wet, I get my fingers in it. It's just a fact of life for me. So I've got the VersaFine Clair in the Twilight. This is one of my favorite inks right here, this Twilight. And little trick, if you're trying to make something black and you want it black, black, blue, black, stamp with the Onyx or the VersaFine Clair in the Onyx and then the Twilight, and you'll get this beautiful, beautiful blue black. Anyway, I digress. This is the way I want it. And I've got here some clear embossing powder, and I'm going to go ahead and just dump some over and heat emboss that on. Just tapping off the excess. We'll go ahead and heat emboss that, and you can see how that color comes right back to life. And I will want to let that cool before I do any kind of ink blending on it, but it won't take long to cool because it's not a gigantic piece. Just kind of shake it a little, get it a little air. It doesn't take long, like I said. Now I want to go ahead and use that same piece of paper and stamp my sentiment. And I'm going to stamp my sentiment in Monarch, so I still want to stick with the kind of the blue-purple theme. And I'm going to select the Stay Wild Moonchild sentiment. And it doesn't really matter where I place it because I'm going to be cutting it out. And I will cut the moon and my sentiment off camera. So here's the VersaFine Clair and the Monarch, another favorite color. It's not fair because all the colors are my favorite. So it's not fair for me to say that, and I don't want to hurt any other color's feelings, but that's just kind of how it is for me. I just happen to love color. That's why my YouTube name is Not Afraid of Color. All right, so he's a little white there, and I don't want him quite so white. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this Brilliance Platinum Planet here and just kind of tap a little ink off and then rub some ink right over top of it so it kind of is, I don't know, the same color, the sort of milky platinum color as the little clouds in my background. And then I'll just take a rag and I'll wipe off the excess off of the embossing. And there I've got that. So these I'll cut everything out off camera. And then we'll go ahead and put this together. So here's my black matte layer. And then I've got my background layer, and I'm just going to use some liquid glue to glue that down and just make sure that I've got a tiny little border all the way around the edges. And then I'm going to glue that all down to a purple card base. And I'm adding a little bit of this monarch around the edge of my sentiment that I have cut out and rounded off the corners. And I just used a punch to cut out my little moon because I have a 2-inch punch and it worked. So anytime I don't have to get out my dies, I'm a happy camper. So I'm going to go ahead and pop my moon up on some 3mm foam tape. And I have some little black foam dots that I'm going to use today. And I'll just place, I don't need a whole bunch of them. So I'm just going to kind of place them in a sort of flower configuration, I guess. I don't know. And then I'll add liquid glue to that as well, just to kind of make sure that it stays stuck down, because that's kind of a glittery embossing powder, so I want to make sure that everything grabs. So we'll pull off the backers, add some liquid glue. Friends, you can have so much fun with inks. Don't be afraid to experiment. Mix them up. Just don't mix up your brushes. So you want to, on your VersaMagics, you want to have a separate brush than what you use on your dye inks, like your Mementos. And then I also use the same kind of, I just call them my pigment brushes. I'm just going to stick something heavier on here so it kind of dries. So I do the same with I have pigment brushes and I have dye ink brushes, and that's kind of how I use them. So I can use them interchangeably with different companies, but I don't interchange my dye and my pigments. So I'm just going to add some foam strips, and these are little 2mm foam strips, to my sentiment because I want it just a little bit lower profile than my moon, who's my main subject here. And we'll go ahead and feel confident that that's dry. I'll pull the backers off. And yes, I did want a little bit of a rustic look, but I did want to keep color. I didn't want to go with, doing a brown or something like that. And I'm just going to place this right here in this kind of corner. And there this card is finished. So I'll hold it up close here so you can see all that sparkle and shine and see all the beautiful colors that were laid down. And there's a little schmutz on there, so I'm just going to take a little white gel pen and just kind of clean it a little bit. That's my form of cleaning. So there we go, much better, much better. So there's the card, all embossed and ink blended, and I hope that you learned a new creative way to use some of your Imagine Tsukaneko products. Spit it out, Moonchild. And I hope that you stay wild, and I hope that you give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed. Wonderful to meet you. Again, my name is Tracy, and I thank you so much for coming. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.